Good morning once again. In case you are just joining us, karibu tena sana to Good Morning Kenya. I'm Jain Wambui. Glad you are with us this morning and would love to know where you are watching us from. So why don't you go ahead and check in using the hashtag Good Morning Kenya pale Twitter. Do remember to leave your location and tag at KBC Channel 1, at Ray Manyara, at Doreen Arange, and at Jain Wambui so that we may be able to see all your feed. So far, appreciating those who have checked in. We have Moher Wabima, William Wambui, always following the program from Watamu. Happy Women's Day. Thank you, sir. We have Kiplagat Kitur saying, good morning. I'm watching live from Raraka here in Nairobi, Kenya. Wishing you all a blessed brand new week full of God's blessings and hugs. Aw, hugs right back to you, man. We also have Kamale, who is saying, you guys look nice, tuned in from Kirinyaga County. Thank you for that. There was a time I was beaten by my dad. My hands and feet were tied. Then I was thrown under the bed without supper. School of Hard Knocks. My guy, we made it. It is well. And we also have Ben Roy saying, good morning, ladies. You make newspaper reviews so interesting. Happy day. Thank you so much for being with us. We do appreciate all of you who have already checked in. And if you haven't, the hashtag is still Good Morning Kenya on Twitter. Check in. I will be getting to your feed in not too long. So right now, we want to get started with the day's conversation. And as mentioned earlier, today we're going to be focusing on this grand day that we are celebrating, International Women's Day. 110 years later, what are the gains that we have made? What are those challenges and barriers that we are still dealing with? And most so looking at this year's theme, which is all about women in leadership, just trying to understand how we can achieve an equal future for everyone, and especially during this COVID-19 space, because it has brought out some harsh realities. We have regressed in terms of the gains that we have made in some areas, but there is still room to do better by everyone. And that is the conversation that we are going to be having today. And we have phenomenal ladies who will be joining us throughout this particular segment. And to start us off, we have one of these amazing ladies with us in studio this morning. She is Silke Hampson, who is the regional coordinator at GIZ, which is GIZ, which is all about better migration management program. Good morning.
Good morning, Jane. It's great to be here.
Thank you for making time to be with us this morning. Maybe we could start with social media handles that our viewers can interact with you on, or your organization as well.
Yes, there's actually a campaign going on for International Women's Day. I believe the Twitter handle, and I'm sort of the generation that hasn't engaged with it, but I believe the global Twitter handle is Choose to Challenge.
No, in regards to your personal one, not. It is well. I feel you on that. But we want to just understand how your journey has been getting to where you are today in light of all these challenges that we face as women. And let's just go way back, looking at how life was growing up back in the day. How would you characterize that for yourself?
I would say I've been quite lucky when I was sort of reflecting on my past. I've actually worked 9 out of 15 years of my professional career was working under women leadership.
Yeah.
Which was amazing. So these were business owners, they were heads of departments, heads of programs, even a female prime minister when I worked in Australia.
Yeah.
I've worked in UN peacekeeping missions with female leaders. So maybe I was just lucky. Maybe this has helped me along, I don't know. But these were definitely what I would call Kali women.
Yes.
In the most positive sense of the word. They were strong, they were determined women, and really quite impressive.
Do you feel by virtue of having interacted with them, working with them, it sort of shaped how you view yourself as a woman, and especially in a leadership capacity?
I've never reflected on it before like that, but I think you might be right.
Yeah.
I think it is something also to encourage you to really lets you see what is possible.
Absolutely. And remember, we also welcome you to be part of this conversation. If you are a woman who's watching us this morning, as we celebrate this day, what are those things that remind you, or, things that you are looking to challenge, especially using the hashtag that is being used globally, hashtag I choose to challenge. What is that you are choosing to challenge today as we mark International Women's Day? Those age-old barriers that have always been there. And, those are some of the things that, I'd like for us to get into, and more so looking at your personal journey to just give us an actual feel of how things have been. And let's just start with, given you've worked with different women in different spaces, let's just start with the history that we have always seen about women, and especially in leadership capacity. So many of them have always had a hard time getting to this position. Do you feel that history is still something that is holding us, even in this day and time, when it comes to allowing women the space and room to take up these positions?
I think so. Men are just perceived to be much more aggressive and better at achieving outcomes. Whereas women tend to be seen as being better at finding compromises, negotiating. And it seems to be that a win seems to be considered a much more important outcome than maybe a win-win situation that actually serves everyone. So this is a kind of strange social norm. And from my side, I sort of reflected a bit on where that comes through in professional life, and it's a social norm that seems to be still provide a lot of preference to the guys. For example, when you're in a boardroom and someone wants a cup of tea, or the director wants a cup of tea, who does he ask? It would generally be the woman, regardless of her position, whether she's a director or a very senior person as well. It's just tea, but would you serve it? I mean, maybe our listeners can also, what would they do? Would they make the cup of tea, or would they say, no, sir, this is not what I'm here for?
And it would be really awkward when, and this is just the actual reality of the matter, if this particular head of the organization did ask another gent, they would consider it weird. And they would consider it normal if it was a lady who was asked, get the cup of tea. But what would you do in that? What would you do in such a situation? And that just goes to show us how some of those issues are so deep-seated that we do them and align with them so subconsciously we don't think much about them. And this also brings me to the next issue, and this is all about, and I like the fact that you've brought up, the workspace specifically, and issues to do with violence. And violence comes in various forms, could be verbally, emotionally, psychologically. And looking at the workspace, you find sexual harassment thrives, and especially against women. From what you have seen over the years, working in the different spaces, is this something that is still, we can do so much better, but we are also a bit reluctant towards challenging it?
I think so, and I guess women need to be careful on where they challenge. So they definitely do choose to challenge. I don't want to ask all women to go out there and challenge their boss because he's made, for example, a compliment. Again, it's just a compliment. But how often have I heard, oh, that's a pretty dress, Silke, you look lovely today? Would I go up to my boss and say, sir, that's a lovely tie, really brings out the colour of your eyes? That would be completely inappropriate. But I've had a few experiences where there were inappropriate jokes or inappropriate comments, maybe inappropriate touching. I'm talking about very sort of low-key things. But standing up for yourself quite often does give you respect. I've had a lot of instances where people go, oh, they were completely taken aback and apologised because they realised, yes, actually, that was a very dumb thing to say.
And they didn't expect such a reaction?
Exactly, and it made them think. These men that I've worked with, they were professional people, they were nice people, they would never argue for that their daughters or their wives are less qualified or deserve less respect. But it is just a subconscious bias, I think, that comes out sometimes. And by pointing it out, by challenging it, I think we can do a lot to change it.
But do you also this issue of not being able to challenge it for most ladies goes back to the kind of information that they have gotten over the years to understand the different form in which sexual violence does present itself in? Do you think we also need to do better in terms of teaching our young girls that this and this falls under sexual violence? Some of these things that we consider so subtle, but actually they are violating your personal space and rights.
I think it's not just about teaching our girls, it's teaching our boys as well. And I think that is particularly important. I mean, sexual harassment is a very wide spectrum. It also depends on what makes you feel uncomfortable. Might be different for a different person. That doesn't mean that your feelings are less valid than another person's. And if you feel uncomfortable, you should choose to speak out. If you can, of course, if it is safe for you.
Absolutely. And then I think this fact that you've mentioned a safe space is also something that is just a whole other subject. But now that we have mentioned, you know, having this conversation even with our boys, therein comes the question of how do we go about it in a way that is constructive and makes sense to them. You know, from a very personal point of thinking, how would you advise we go about having these conversations, and especially starting in the home setup where most of our habits and traits are nurtured, to just make sure that our boys understand that a woman is complete as she is. She doesn't need validation or being looked down on from me as a young boy.
I think it is about parents, sisters, friends to challenge behavior. Yeah. So if there is inappropriate behavior, point it out and explain why it is not okay. And maybe a good way to bring it home to men and boys is to think about, how would you feel if this was your little sister? How would you feel if this was, or your big sister? How would you feel if this was your mother? Because people feel a lot more protected about their immediate family or their girlfriends than they would about just that woman over there or the woman on the street. It
starts with simple examples that make sense to them. Again, it boils back down to making it alive to them. Help them understand in a way that makes sense. Don't just come there with your theories and just imagine you go into this space, then this happens. That will not make sense. Use something that hits home, and that is almost always with somebody who they can actually relate with, because we cannot exist in a space as women and still want our rights to be respected and upheld while we are living in a world that, you know, their almost other half population is of the opposite gender. So we need to involve them in this conversation straight from the house, and that starts with you as parents. Now, let's talk a bit about leadership. With the fact that there aren't as many women leaders across the world, do you think this is also serving to just allow these barriers that have existed for so long continue to thrive?
Yes, of course, and as I mentioned, I had the good fortune to work with a lot of female leaders, and maybe that was an opportunity to really believe in myself and see, no, it is possible. It could have been different if you have a whole row of men who kind of enforce those stereotypes and serve, as you will, as gatekeepers, for example, to just maintain the status quo. So I think that's definitely a challenge, and this is where we need to really push for. I don't like these quota to say there needs to be so many women, there needs to be, you know, it should be based on performance and capability.
Merit, yeah.
But I think sometimes it needs a little bit of a push to really put women in certain positions, to give them an opportunity to shine.
But do you think only women can properly represent issues concerning women?
As compared to
having also men speak for and support and champion for giving women more spaces.
And I think they have to.
So we don't really, because there's this narrative, I came across it some time back where it was actually an argument that was going on Twitter, where one group was saying only women can represent women issues, and the other group was saying it doesn't always need only women to represent women issues. You can also have men who represent women issues. And there was that argument, is it only women who can represent women issues, or can men also do that for the women, looking at the space that we are in, that men are in most of these positions of power?
I think we need to bring the men on board, definitely. And this is not an act of charity. It's not an act of compassion to empower women. It is common sense. You know, there's like 50% of the global population. you need to bring them on board if you want to have a just society, if you want to maximize your economic potential, if you want to maximize your creative potential. It makes common sense.
It makes sense.
So we need everyone on board.
We need everyone on board.
That would be my argument.
I completely agree with that, because looking at that particular argument, I think it's a conversation that needs both. We need women to represent women issues, and we also need our men to also be at the forefront championing towards creating a gender equal space for all of us to thrive. Now, I'd like us to go back and just talk a bit about what your organization does for the benefit of our viewers who are watching and they're wondering, what is this GIZ organization all about? Maybe you could give us a brief overview of what your organization does.
Yes, so GIZ is actually the International Development Organization for the Government of Germany. So we are a government organization, not an NGO. We work globally. We're quite an experienced and well-established organization with around 20,000 employees worldwide. Here in Kenya, we have about 350 people working for us. This is Kenyans as well as some expats. And we work in multiple sectors. So we work in, I believe we're very, very experienced in agriculture, in climate change, in governance, and support for women's equality is like a cross-cutting issue. It really gets addressed and in every single sector, in every single program that we work on. So the program I work on is on better migration management. This is funded by the European Union and the German government, and we work on improving migration governance. So we assist governments to ensure that migration is regular, safe for everyone, and also addresses human trafficking. And those are issues that disproportionately affect women and girls. You know, so it is a very pertinent topic. Absolutely.
And just from what you have seen, being part of this particular department, what are those harsh realities that you get to see so many, and especially young women faced when they're just trying to have this whole migration process done?
So particularly when you come from an area where there's few opportunities, maybe you don't have a voice as a woman in the community that you live in. There's still a lot of early marriage going on here in Kenya, FGM, and this is all exacerbated by the COVID pandemic, of course. People move to find better opportunities for them.
Absolutely.
It's human nature, that's what they do. And if these opportunities to move regularly and legally don't exist, or you don't have access to the information on that, people go out and they will try to migrate anyway. This might be migrating to the big city, or it might be migrating overseas to find a job there. And particularly when we're talking about irregular migration, this puts people in a very, very vulnerable situation.
Absolutely. And how then do you step in as an organization to just make this whole process easier, and especially for those who might not have even the financial capability or the necessary information that they need, or even just the basics that they need to just ensure this process flows very smoothly, especially in light of what COVID-19 did globally. So many people went without food, went without shelter, because they just didn't have the basics that they need. And you can imagine how worse it was for somebody who needed to go to a safer space.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of these essential services actually dropped during COVID. Because there was funding not available, or it was just simply for pandemic prevention. They weren't on offer. So we're still kind of getting the data on what happened to migration during the COVID situation. It definitely hasn't stopped. And it definitely hasn't gotten easier. So things that we, for example, do as part of my program, we're working very closely with the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights to ensure there is a rights-based approach to migration governance. I've seen a big shift in the whole migration discussion. So when we started, it was very focused on security and ensuring like who comes in and out of the country. That discussion has very much changed into a migration is about so much more. about opportunities. So how can migration policy, for example, support trade, investment? How can it ensure skills exchange, providing opportunities for Kenyans overseas, maximizing remittances coming into the countries? So that was a really nice shift to see, and I hope we contributed in some way to that.
Yeah.
With the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, we're, for example, working with recruitment agencies here in Kenya. They're sending over 60,000 Kenyans overseas each year, and that's a great thing, because that's 60,000 Kenyans who go overseas, who learn new skills, who earn money, who might be able to send money back to support their families.
Better opportunities.
But in some cases, it ends up in not such a good way. And if you're overseas and you're actually being exploited, no one, you don't gain anything from it. Your family here doesn't get anything out of it, and nor does Kenya as a country. So these are really things where we want to see that we can bring in a human rights-based approach to that recruitment process. So there is some oversight on what situation are these migrants going into.
All right. Now, as we draw this conversation to a very close, very briefly, maybe you could highlight some of the programs that you're currently working on for the benefit of our viewers, and also how they can also get in touch if they're seeking some of these services or just the information that they need when it comes to issues to do with migration. Very briefly.
All right. We're working with civil society, and there's a lot of organizations that work with human trafficking victims and migrants. There are hotlines. Heart Kenya, for example, is a big one. Trace Kenya, as well as the Department of Children's Services. They all have hotlines that can assist people. And we're also today, if you live in Kitui, we're having a International Women's Day in Kitui today. Lots of information, and the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights actually provides some legal advice there to the people in Kitui today. Absolutely.
Well, we wish you the absolute best as you continue on with this journey. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. We have been speaking with Silke Hampson, who is the regional coordinator working with GIZ under the Department of Better Migration Management. Thank you. We do wish you the absolute best.
Thank you, Jane, and happy International Women's Day.
Happy International Women's Day. Now, do stay with us. Up next, we will be still continuing with this conversation around women in leadership, and we will be joined by Professor Gerono Rotit, who will be joining us via Zoom. So stay with us. We'll be right back.